Unbelievable. Wow. Okay, Rabbi, a few more questions as we're going along here. Regarding tzedakah, you talked about how do we give our tithes, if you will, and you mentioned many times to give to the poor and etc. But in the Torah, it doesn't state to give to the poor in your community. And with that regard, with that statement, how does that go? Like for someone like me, I live in Kingsland, but I work in Austin a lot. I don't know the people in Austin, but I know that there are people like beggars on the street corners, like in all these different places. And one thing I have noticed is these same beggars have been working those street corners for a long time in some cases. So I don't want to throw in too many assumptions, but I have seen some pretty crazy stuff go on with these people who are out on the street corners, peddlers, or not peddlers, but people who are begging for money. Some of them may be legitimate. We don't know. But is there a connection with that commandment that tells us to give to the poor in your community? And maybe is that why? Is because at least if they're in your community, you know whether they're really poor or not, or if they're just working the system.
Okay. So if a person has a reason to suspect, good reason to suspect, that a person who has a tin cup and collecting money is not genuinely poor, but does this for a living, then you don't have to put money in their tin cup, with one exception. On Purim, only on Purim, it's forbidden to do that, and anyone who stretches out his hand, you have to give them charity. On Purim alone.
Wow.
But outside of Purim, if a person has a reason to believe that the man is a charlatan, a person doesn't have to give them money. What in fact is more likely is not that someone is a charlatan, but what is possible is that a very large percentage of the homeless are homeless for a reason. I don't know what the numbers are now, but when I went to school social years ago, numbers were pretty high, suffer from mental illness, and quite a number of them suffer from substance abuse. So it's possible that people who are homeless and who are collecting money, it's not that it's a scam. It's hard for me to believe that you can make more money with a tin cup or standing with a cardboard on the highway than you can working in Walmart. But I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Can I give you back in the late 80s here in Austin, the radio station was hearing stories about people who were doing this for scamming purposes. So one of the DJ hosts decided to go out and disguise himself as a bum in downtown Austin. And this was back in the 80s, and he got over $300 in one day just from standing there with a cup. I mean,
right. All right. So then, this is not but one thing I would say is that you may be you may be concerned. I can't speak to that. I could speak to that there are a considerable number of homeless who are alcoholics or drug users. And that's how they wound up in that predicament. Okay. This is not an field that I have expertise in, but I have read a considerable amount of the literature on this topic. And that's why I sometimes encourage folks, because obviously the worst possible scenario is that if someone's an alcoholic, they're addicted. Alcohol has an addiction rate of somewhere around 60%. And it's very often genetically, so it's very possible that the people you may be giving money to, it's possible, will actually take that money and then use it to buy alcohol with that money. Well, that's the worst thing you want, because you're actually poisoning them further. And I encourage folks, if that's what they suspect, to go to whatever Walmart and buy food. And I've done this on the streets of New York. I do this. The done this in many cities in the West, where I will go to the store and just fill up my car with food and just hand them the food, actually give them the food itself, give them the bread, give them food so they can, I'll give them blankets. In Jakarta, I can give them money directly, which I do, because in Jakarta, the areas where the people are very impoverished are people who you can see on the streets that have no arms, they have no legs. They're people who suffer from disease, from leprosy, from diabetes, and so on. But you have a person there on certain streets where a woman doesn't have an arm, doesn't have legs. So I don't have to worry that she's an alcoholic. It's also unlikely in this country that in Indonesia that someone's an alcoholic. It's not part of their culture to drink alcohol. Indonesians generally not drinkers. So, I mean, you don't see bars in Indonesia unless you go to what's called the bule areas. So Indonesia is different. But if you just give them food, give them full cooked food, that'll be a great thing. Feed them, clothe them, put clothing on them, give them a warm place to sleep. But you might want to, and that you have to, each case individual. But I'm not, if you feel that someone is ingenuous and is not poor at all, certainly you should use your discretion. Again, in Jewish law in Purim, whoever stretches out his hand, you have to give them. That's the only day of the year that one must not use that discretion.